have the conversation on IMF warns Nigerians' budget deficits and risk of oil price drop. Our guest is Dr. Ifediora Amobi, who is an economist. Good evening, sir, and welcome.
Good evening.
Okay, so far, IMF is warning, and this is just coming as a shock to the layman, really doesn't understand what is going on. So in the clear terms, can you tell us what exactly is going on and why IMF is putting out this warning out to the Nigerian oil sector?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, the IMF has warned us on a number of occasions in the past, whether it was overspending, whether it was not saving enough. I mean, there are quite a number of things that Nigerian government or Nigerian economy has been confronted with, which the IMF has warned us against. That. And then besides, the IMF has also commended us on some of the things that we've done right. And so an IMF warning is something that we also take seriously, because they look at the economy, they look at what we're doing, and compared to the global economy, it helps us position ourselves properly and cover some of the areas that we don't do, locally. And so in this context, we have a situation now where oil prices have actually dropped from about 6 months ago, about in the beginning of the year. And so when we signed the budget for 2025, the budget was benchmarked at $75 a barrel. What that meant basically was, in layman's term, was that we were expecting to be making at least, benchmark at that $75 a barrel, producing at 2 million barrels per day. What has happened in the past 6 months is that oil prices have dropped. I mean, it fluctuates, but if you draw a straight line, it has dropped from what it was, which was even above that $75 a barrel, to about $68, $69 today. What that means is that if we were expecting to make revenue in foreign exchange at that price, and if we had budgeted our expenditure at $75, today it's now $68. What it means is that we're going to be earning less than what we had planned earlier in the year. And not only that, the volume of oil output that we had estimated would generate revenue in 2025, which was 2 million barrels a day, today we're barely making 1.5 million barrels a day. So not only has the price of oil dropped,
the production level as well
has also dropped. So what that now means is that we are going to be earning a lot less than what we had budgeted for 2025. So what the IMF is saying to us is, hey guys, I hope Nigeria is aware of these externalities and how that reflects our own expenditure. Because if you're expecting $1 million this year and you've already budgeted how you're going to spend that $1 million, and you end up with $700,000,
you have to adjust.
You must adjust.
So what effect is this going to have on our annual budget?
Well, what we have to do is to, and I'll use the economic word and what the IMF used, is to recalibrate our 2025 annual budget, lower our own benchmark from 75 to a more realistic figure, and then also cut down on our expenditure. So if we had planned to spend X amount, given that we're going to be earning less, we have to cut down our expenditure from now to the end of the year to X minus 1. So it's just a way of prompting us. IMF is just saying to us, I hope you guys realize that this is what could be, this is actually what could happen. The result is that this whole scenario could affect our fiscal deficit, which when the budget was planned and signed off, we were estimating a fiscal deficit of about 2.5% of GDP. Okay. With this drop in oil prices and the drop in output, this could throw our fiscal deficit to almost 5% of GDP, which means that a lot of things that we had planned will not be
carried out.
Will not be able to achieve them.
So if we don't review our budgets, I'm not using the correct term that you had used earlier, sorry. If we don't review our budgets, what's going to be the long-term implication of this on our economy?
Oh, we're going to a huge deficit, first and foremost. Secondly, we won't be able to, like I said before, execute the projects that we had planned for this year. This could lead to everything. I mean, a fiscal deficit leads to inflation, in its own way. So we're going to see prices, going up again. We're going to start experiencing, scarcity of goods and services in the economy. And this could lead to more social unrest. So we, the people, all of a sudden, we've gone through a downturn of high prices and, all the things that we've gone through. We're now at a stable stage where prices are not going up like they used to, 1 year ago or thereabout. And then suddenly we start experiencing this again. The youths are going to hit the streets. People are going to, be very, very upset. So those are some of the things that we have to. Okay,
let's look at the planning committee. I mean, experts were involved in this particular, knowing that we are going to earn $7.5 per barrel. Why is it that it wasn't properly planned out and it wasn't a realistic plan?
Not really. I mean, one thing is that you make certain assumptions that enables you plan. So when the budget process starts, the experts sit around the table and say, okay, the past year, this is how the dollar naira has fluctuated. This is how the price of oil, maybe, okay, let's take 2024. Oil prices, rose as a result of the war in the Russian-Ukraine crisis, amongst other things that happened, that instability, the Israel-Gaza, issue in the Palestinians, etc. So we had supply chain disruptions. What we mean by that is the logistics of getting goods to the market, getting raw materials from one part of the world to the other, shipping costs, all those things became high. And so with those shocks that happened in the system, the planners could say, okay, well, based on this, we don't foresee the war to end in 2025. We don't foresee this, we make these assumptions. And based on that, we say, okay, if oil prices had gone up in 2024, maybe they'll still inch up a little bit more in 2025. So let us, instead of under budgeting, let us be a bit more realistic. And so we agree at $75 a barrel and say this is what the average price would be in 2025. Now, some certain things have now happened in 2025. Donald Trump's tariffs, etc., have changed the whole global, global economy, international finance, trade, etc. So what has now happened is that, based on that, and the fact that there have been some ceasefires and some agreements, oil prices have now started going down. And when it starts going down, if you had budgeted at this level, you start making less money, less foreign exchange. So if one barrel, we had estimated one barrel to be $75, and today one barrel is $68, that means that we're making less dollars, and we're not even selling up to that one barrel. So, we have to make these adjustments, and if we don't make them, some of the things I mentioned earlier on.
So how can Nigeria review and also reduce our overdependence on oil? Because it seems like a fluctuating situation here, and you can't always predict what the market brings.
Yeah, well, reviewing is not the difficult part, because we can sit down and rejig the numbers and make it a bit more realistic. The other aspect that you brought up now is how can we now
not be dependent
reduce
on oil.
our dependence on oil. For the past 50 years, we've been talking about diversifying. Diversification, over the years. And we have tried as much as possible to reduce our dependency on oil. We've moved into a lot of the non-oil sectors, agriculture. We've tried to increase our manufacturing. We've had some infrastructural problems like power and the rest of them. And so our manufacturing sector hasn't really picked up yet. We've moved a lot of our revenue stream into services, ICT, real estate, construction, even the creative economy, the arts, Nollywood, and so on. All these won't generate revenue. But we have to do more. One of the things this government is doing or has done is to try and bring in more money into the economy outside oil. But they're not doing that on the sector level. They're now doing it through increased revenue from taxes and others. So the tax reforms and other tariffs that have actually gone up increases government revenue. It is not the most popular, when it comes down to the people, but it's another way of indirectly saying, well, let's depend less on oil. Let's now make money from the people, tax them more. So.
Okay, so in what ways exactly can the government, reform tax administration? Because it's just as you mentioned that instead of focusing on other sectors, using the tax reform aspect of it too. So how can we broaden our tax-based tools as well?
Well, that's actually what the government has done. The president just signed off 4 bills, the whole reforming, taxation. And these bills will now do 2 major things. One is increase government's purse through taxes, but mostly focusing on the high-level, rich, big corporations, etc. And then secondly, giving a tax break to a certain level of income earners and below. And so it's more like the more you make, the more you pay. The less you make, the less you pay. And there's a whole group of the population that is, not even taxed at all. So we are actually working on that, at the federal level. The new tax bills that have been signed into effect will ensure that as far as tax administration is concerned, some of that will now be taken into effect. It's going to be more, our tax system is going to be more automated. So we don't have to have tax collectors going around ensuring that
harassing people.
Yeah, people pay their taxes. And so that's the challenge of the ICT, e-government part, to ensure that.
Okay, so apart from this, how can Nigeria also, attract foreign investors in order to help us in our oil sectors and even in the non-oil sectors?
Yeah, attracting foreign investment has been one of the core, pillars of not just this government, but previous governments, even at the state levels. Foreign direct investment is another strong way of ensuring that you have foreign inflows into the economy, whether it's at the federal level or at the subnational levels. In recent times, it hasn't been the easiest thing to do, because even the same countries that you're marketing to bring their money into your own country also have their own issues, and they are also trying to bring foreign investment into their own countries. And so the challenge for us here, it will be, one, to ensure that we have enough incentives to attract them, because foreigners don't just bring their money because you're Nigeria. You must have something. There's certain things that you're putting on the table, whether it's tax holidays or tax breaks or providing land or whatever, whatever the issue is, and providing the infrastructure so that when they bring in their money and build industries, they're not providing their own power, their own security, building their own roads, providing their own water. This infrastructure has to be in place first. So to attract these investors, we have to invest heavily in infrastructure, capital expenditure. Now, if we're not earning enough from oil because oil prices are going down and we're not selling enough, it becomes a challenge. Then what we have to do now is to, and I'll use this word again, recalibrate our own expenditure from, instead of spending billions of naira to renovate presidential villas or buying yachts or buying presidential jets, we use this, we put it into capital expenditure to ensure that the infrastructure is there that will attract the investors who would come in, invest in Nigeria and employ our people.
So how will this same calibration of the 2025 budgets really affect our capital expenditure, in a broader term?
Yeah, what it will now do is that it will now make our expenditure more realistic. So let's assume that I promised to put $1 million on the table here, and I say, go and spend it. And you sit down and you write a list of what you're going to buy. If at the end of the day, I bring half of that, you're going to go back to your list and cancel some things and prioritize and say, okay, I'll do this one. If the other half comes, then I'll complete that. So that's what we have to do. We have to sit down and say, okay, what are those things that are priority? Where are those social safety net issues that we have to do to ensure that the people don't go out on the streets and disrupt the government, etc.? How do we put money into more pockets today? One of the things the IMF has recommended and has always recommended is that we ramp up our palliatives program, give people cash transfers and stuff like that. Personally, I am not a big advocate of that, because what it does is it makes people sit back and wait for handouts. But if that money is plugged into projects that create jobs for the people, make them productive, then they'll be more sustainable. If you keep giving people handouts, one day the cash will finish.
So how sustainable exactly is the Nigeria's rising debt profile?
Our debt profile hasn't risen that much. And the reason I say that is that over the past 1 year, we've been able to pay off quite a number of our debtors, including the IMF. And at least we have paid down to a manageable level. The only thing that we do, and the only mistake we make, is that when we pay down, we go and borrow more. So it becomes a cycle. So at any given time, our debt profile is high because we've paid off, but we've borrowed more than we paid off. So it's almost like walking up a step. It's
the same cycle.
Right.
So what are the risks of continued borrowing? If we keep borrowing, having the same cycle?
If we keep borrowing, what we're doing is that we're now mortgaging the future. So you have the next generation inherits a government that is laden with debt. And that's one thing you don't want to do, because every time you have, you generate revenue, a big part of it goes into debt servicing. And so you're not able to really do those things you're supposed to do. You're not able to invest in health, in education, infrastructure, etc. You're spending more of the time servicing the debts that, your parents, your forefathers had accumulated, and then, passed on to you.
So how can CBN support in this particular situation, the Central Bank of Nigeria?
Yeah, the Central Bank of Nigeria controls the monetary policy side of the economy. One of the key things I believe the CBN should do is to tighten monetary policy. What do we mean by that? Ensuring that the money in circulation is less, a decrease in the money supply, because when you have too much money in the economy, prices go up. So the CBN has to find a way of not injecting too much funds into the system. That way, you keep prices at a lower level and you don't disrupt the social setting. And it's not just the central bank. On the fiscal side, which is, taxation and government spending, because we're now earning less because of these same issues, lower oil prices and not selling enough oil, government expenditure has to be curtailed. So government shouldn't, like I mentioned, the yacht and the presidential villa. Government has now start spending less and prioritizing its spending into projects that generate
money,
income, as versus just spending, carelessly.
So we've talked about the CBN. What of the private sectors as well, and other subnational government sectors too?
Yeah, well, what happens at the federal level affects the subnationals, because more than 60% of the states, or even higher than that, rely on the center for their revenue. And so if the federal government is successfully cutting down on its expenditure, it will affect the states. Now, on the private sector side, the private sector needs to spend. So it's almost like the opposite now. Private sector expenditure is good for the economy, because what it now means is that money, you and I as private people, if we can go to the shops and to the market and spend our money, that means that we're actually making money. Mm-hmm. And the more we spend, the more the private sector can generate more goods. So for instance, take Cadbury that makes Bonvita, or Unilever that makes soap, or any of these companies. If we don't spend and buy their products, they won't be able to produce more for the market. So the fact that the private sector is consuming and spending increases the supply of these products, makes them produce more, makes them employ people more, makes them to expand their product line, which is good for the economy. That's economic growth. If consumption is held back and we're not able to spend and consume, they will have to shut down some of their plants.
People are jobless.
Exactly. Lay their workers off, and then the economy collapses. So it's almost like, two sides of the same coin.
Honestly, so what should Nigerians expect from this particular development?
Well, Nigerians should actually expect, one, that the government listens and acts accordingly, because failure to do so will throw us into a big financial, deficit mess by the end of the year. Because what was going to happen is that we're going to now, relent on a lot of the things that we promised in the budget. The budget now becomes unrealistic. We end up with a big budget deficit because our expenditure is now more than our revenue. And so if we're sure that revenue is going to go down, and the risk here is that because there are a lot of what is called externalities. These are things that we have no control over, like the price of oil.
So many things can influence it.
Exactly. We cannot, as Nigerians, just say, okay, what we'll do is we'll halt oil prices from falling. We don't have that control. Oil prices can keep falling until it hits $50, $40. So what are we going to do? We have to adjust our own consumption patterns and expenditure patterns. And so it will affect everybody down the line. It could bring prices down because there'll be scarcity. Well, scarcity, actually prices go up, but then it can actually, it could bring prices down because people are not going to be earning enough because government is not spending enough. But on the other hand, we as a country, we just have to understand this and act accordingly to avoid whatever economic crisis or disaster that could happen.
So the oil sector now being the major key player in this particular situation, what exactly can they do in order to help our economy?
The oil sector is one sector that, as much as we get almost 90% of our revenue from oil, the oil sector's contribution to GDP is very, very small. Because a lot of the decisions when it comes to oil is external. We have no control. How much oil we sell depends on OPEC. The price of oil is determined, also outside Nigeria. The oil companies that even bring in the technology to drill the oil are foreign companies. And so the oil sector is there, it's good, we make money out of it, but we have little or no control over the whole sector itself. And I always tell people, I equate the oil sector to your typical Nigerian football fan. The average person here will die for that foreign European club, like, oh, yes, we're winning. Meanwhile, they're buying and selling players for millions of pounds or euros. The teams are making money and everything, but you're not even getting a penny of it. Meanwhile, if the team loses, you cry more than the owners of the team. When the team wins, you jubilate more than them. So that's basically how the oil sector is. It's doing well, it's generating money, it's growing the economy, but we have very little control over it. We're trying to now have some influence in the oil sector with the likes of Dangote and the rest of them. We have nationalized some of the oil companies, we've privatized others. We are better off today in terms of Nigeria's equity or Nigerians' ownership and equity in the oil, whether it's an oil major or the oil service companies, upstream or downstream, which is a plus. But we still have the likes of Chevron and Total and Shell and the rest of them, calling the shots at that upper level.
So if you're going to give a word of advice to every single sector out there, the agricultural, whatever sector it is, in order to help us, what would you say exactly?
To every single sector, now that's a difficult one. Well, what I'll say basically is, one, tighten your belt, because we have no control over this drops, or this current drop in oil prices. Tighten your belt. Don't spend carelessly. Be judicious in your spending. Ensure that your budgets are as realistic as possible. And just hang in there. We'll ride through the storm. If and when oil prices start going up again, then
if and when,
and it will, because we've always had these fluctuations. Yeah, so sometimes it's just a matter of just riding out the storm, because that after the storm, the sun will still come out and it will be bright again. And so when oil prices start going up again, then we can, the country makes more money, and whether it's the subnationals or the private sector, will benefit from it. I had, in a previous session, I had also argued that the government has to savings, our sovereign wealth funds. And the reason why, even Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, when she was a minister, and even as president of the World Bank at the time, had also advised the government to grow our sovereign wealth fund. Savings. And it's because of times like this, when we have these, negative shocks, we have enough buffer until, things get better.
So do you think Nigerians are ready for what is coming ahead?
Well, first of all, we don't have a choice. The storm is brewing.
I mean, most people are uninformed of what is really happening now.
Well, at least the IMS has raised the alarm. Maybe people in government, maybe the economic team already knew about it. Maybe they are working on something right now. But it's good that the IMF made it public and it's being discussed, in various fora like this. And so as more people watch and more people, read up on things, they become more and more aware, because the average person doesn't follow, international oil prices
at all.
Right. And so when it hits like this, prices going down, output going down, borrowing going up, expenditure, I mean, I don't know what major spending, maybe the National Assembly is due for a new set of cars, and we know we're going to bring out trillions of naira to back. So things like this, we need to really curtail, and if it means passing a law that says when you come in as a member of the House or Senate, you only get one vehicle until you leave. And you go with it. That way, you drive it carefully and ensure that it's
in good shape.
Yeah, but if you have a law that says, every 3 years you're entitled to a new vehicle, then we'll never be able to save.
Okay.
Save Nature TV, news in your pocket.